Forte is connected. Oh, hi, you too. Welcome. It's just you and Urban View today. We're not adding Instagram, because frankly, that requires a whole lot of manipulation, and it's hard because I can't share the clips with them, and I feel like they just be getting left out. So hi, YouTube. Welcome to the Lurie Daniel Favorite Show. For those of you who are new to this live, just know that this is part of a 2-hour show. You are only going to get like a half an hour, maybe not even fully that, because here you are just being invited into a conversation that is already live and happening, and that is a conversation here on Urban View, channel 126 on SiriusXM, where talk empowers and becomes action. We're going to be talking a lot about this book here. Hopefully you all can see it in the camera. It is called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. It is by an author, an ancestor, a phenomenal scholar by the name of James Cone. I'm going to get to that in just a little bit. Just wanted to set the tone, because I know some of you are curious about the title. And the title of today's live is Beware the Dangers of Today's Black Christianity in a White Nationalist America. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. But first things first, Black communities realizing that, wow, Republicans really don't like your Black ass. And not that we had to realize it, we kind of knew it. But I'm saying it that way because there is a growing segment of Black Christians out there who are making themselves more publicly known. And they are they are siding on right-wing white Christian nationalism. And so we are going to have that conversation. But before we get there, I want to talk about all the things that are happening with the Black community, because this is not a call out to anybody. This is a call in, because I believe, as someone who was raised in a Black church, that we have access to one of the greatest forms of spiritual power. Not the greatest form of spiritual power, because everybody has spiritual power. And considering Christianity is one of the newest religions on the planet, it just seems a little pretentious to me to act like it's the best of all of them. But I believe that we have access to spiritual power through the Christian concepts and ideas. And if we use that power, however, in the furtherance of white Christian nationalism, in the furtherance of white supremacy, then you are not, my friends, a Nat Turner or a Gabriel Prosser or a Denmark Vesey kind of Christian. You a white Christian. We got to have the difference and the distinction. But let's talk about what Republican Christians are doing to Black people right now, according to the Washington Post. And it's weird to be reading from the Washington Post, because I don't even think the Washington Post has any full-time Black reporters anymore. They just fired Karen Attiah, who was a phenomenal reporter, and they fired her because she dared to actually quote Mr. Cook and posted a blue sky, a blue, I don't know what you call him on Blue Sky. I think they started out calling him Skeets. I don't think that went too far. But she basically posted on Blue Sky a quote from Charlie Kirk, one of the many quotes that are available, and she was fired from the Washington Post. Now, what's weird about that is if you are writing about Charlie Kirk or anybody, and you're not using their actual commentary, you're not using direct quotes, that is considered an incomplete article. It's an incomplete paper. If they have an abundance of material available, why would citing them as a reporter be problematic? That's a conversation the Washington Post is going to have internally, but they probably won't, because they are now headed up by white nationalists, and they seem to be very comfortable there. But they did put out this article, so there's that. And this is an article that is entitled Black Communities Shaken by Trump Cuts Feel Left Behind Again. And this was the result of an analysis that the Washington Post engaged in that found 22 projects had been negatively impacted, projects that were directly related to the interests of Black people. And so I'm inviting us all in to take a look at this, because we got to be clear about what time it really is. Because we in that space. Remember how I would say in the years leading up to 2024, I need all of us to imagine what would happen if the people who have access to power and the people who control the resources decide that at some point they're not going to give us no more. This is what that looks like. So according to the report, the Trump administration has ended 24 projects that address health and environmental issues in Southern Black communities. And basically rural Alabama counties, for example, lost a $14 million grant that was going to upgrade sanitation systems. You remember when I told y'all about the poop fields and how there are some people who have pipes and sanitation that is so terrible that it literally floods their backyards with sewage, with feces. You might have a feces pool going from your front door till you get into your driveway to get into your car. This was something that we had talked about a lot, because this is a result of aging infrastructure. Infrastructure is a resource, and unwillingness to invest in fixing that aging infrastructure. Now, why communities that have this problem are getting their issues addressed? Because they're white, and white racist people are in control of the resources. But according to the report, Black ones aren't. And a historically Black Virginia neighborhood is also losing out on a $20 million grant to stop severe flooding. So when your communities are severely being flooded and you had money that was given to you by government, by the Democrats, let's be clear, let's call it out, to stop that severe flooding, what you supposed to do now that the severe flooding is going to continue to happen because the Republicans took it back because they're racist and anti-Black? And if you're a Black Republican, I love you. I would encourage you to give us a call and let us know how you interpret these topics and stories, because as Black Republicans, you have a special obligation to make sure that you are using your political power to get your party to not fucking Black people. Let's move on. In Louisiana, there have been multiple federal efforts that were ended. According to the report, the Justice Department lawsuit against a corporation that was accused of basically giving Black people cancer. Basically giving Black people cancer. Because remember when I talked before about regulations and how regulations are just a multisyllabic word for rules, and rules were designed to tell corporations, you can't just throw your trash up in the air and spew it all in the air and spew your toxic fumes. You can't just spew your toxicity into the local rivers and then bury it in the ground, because that's going to poison the people. The reason that corporations are not allowed to do that is because of regulations. But what is the one thing that Republicans don't like? Regulations. And so they've gotten rid of a number of the rules that would have kept these corporations in check, to the extent that those rules were even effective. And frankly, there's a lot of in the history to suggest that they weren't even as effective as they needed to be. But basically, that corporation, don't you worry, you are going to be able to poison as many Black people as you want with all your cancer-causing chemicals, thanks to the Republicans and Donald Trump. The designation of an area that was a national historic landmark to limit industrialization, that's done. So you go ahead and industrialize the hell out of those communities. Damn, those Black people, they should just move. I don't know where they're going to move to, but it's not going to be next to the whites. Let's figure it out. According to the report, grants from the Environmental Protection Agency to support mounting air quality in Cancer Alley, which I had recently mentioned, which is not like a little alley. And I talk more about this in the podcast that's coming out later today at 2:00. Cancer Alley, we tend to think of as like an alley. It's 80 miles long. It's an 80-mile stretch of primarily Black towns and Black villages that were devastated by industrial pollution. And thanks to the Republicans and Donald Trump, who are engaging in white supremacist political realities, they're not going to get the relief that the Democrats had promised them before, because not enough people voted for the Democrats to continue to stay in power. Let's call it what it is. Elections have consequences. And apparently for Black people, those consequences mean exposure to early cancer. Thanks, Republicans, and thanks to all you voters who stayed home. Oh, aren't you proud of yourself? Now, Trump administration has said that these changes are necessary because we have to curb government spending. Officials have also linked some Biden-era climate programs to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that President Donald Trump and his top aides have said amount to illegal discrimination. Yes, because apparently cleaning the dirt that white corporations, or the poisons that white corporations have spewed into the planet, that's pro-Black. So I guess we can all die in the name of owning the libs and owning the Blacks. I don't know. But according to Jen Dugan, who is the executive director of the Environmental Integrity Project, she says that old and crumbling infrastructure in these southern communities that should keep everyone safe and healthy, it's not going to be repaired or upgraded. This is incredibly cruel, and it is lazy, lazy for the Trump administration to destroy and tear down these programs. Now, if you go to the article, you will be able to see a graph and a chart that really explain to you the nature of these programs, the wide reach that they were going to have. And these were programs that the Democrats had forced into existence. These are programs that the Democrats had funded that are now no longer going to be funded. So you know how people are like, they both sides, two birds on two wings on the same bird. This don't feel the same. This don't feel the same at all. There were nearly 24 climate justice programs that Donald Trump ended. Some of the federal notices that were canceled all have that kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion language in them. And so apparently cleaning the earth is now anti-white. So this is where we're at. But I talk much more about this in the podcast episode, which again will be out later, including some additional article references and some clips. But we also learned that in additional anti-Black news stemming from these United States government, the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria has been engaging in this effort to revoke visas from Nigerians in a way that has left a lot of them stranded. Now, you may, as I do, you may know that Nigerians have a reputation for being among the smartest immigrants in the United States. They tend to have some of the most degrees, some of the most scientifically driven degrees, and out of the entire continent of Africa, as it pertains to immigrants who are here in these United States, it is often considered, Nigerians are often considered among the most educated when it comes to degrees and baccalaureate and post-baccalaureate programs. And I don't know if that has anything to do with why America is upset right now. I have another theory, which we'll get to in just a minute. But basically, Nigerians are finding themselves at the airport or living abroad, having had visas issued to them months ago, years ago, and basically finding out kind of like on the low that, hey, your visa is no longer good. There are people who had gone to airports. They had business trips. They weren't even planning to come and stay. They had business meetings, international affairs, and some of them are government officials. Finding their visas have been snatched. Now, I'm just going to say, in this time of great travail, it is not lost on me that one of the things that white nationalists are doing is purging this country of migrants who are not white. This country is getting really good at getting rid of migrants or immigrants who are Black, who are Latino, they're getting rid of everybody brown. The only people that's going to be left here, if they get their way, the only people that's going to be left here are the white nationalists the handful of righteous whites that haven't decided to just go to Canada because I can't take it anymore, and the indigenous, what indigenous communities exist, and us, Black people. I'm just going to say this is probably not the best time to be engaging in proactive amplification of diaspora wars, because there may come a time, as somebody who spent a significant portion of my childhood in Germany, I was born in Germany, I did not live my whole childhood in Germany, but spent a significant portion of my childhood in Germany, having studied refugee realities. It would be really foolish of us in this moment, strategically, even if you're only thinking in your own self-interest selfishly, but strategically, this is the wrong time to be making enemies among people with whom you might have way more in common than you don't. I'm gonna just say that, but I also think it's really interesting because I'm aware of this growing frustration among European countries with African countries. Have you guys been paying attention to this? Mali nationalized a number of they're nationalizing their gold, as is Burkina Faso. There are a number of nations, African nations, that are nationalizing their resources. Now, when I say nationalizing their resources, what that means is they are telling the foreign corporations that have set up shop in their countries, the gold mining, the diamond mining, the cocoa mining, I don't think you mine cocoa, but the cocoa harvesting, they are telling European nations, you're not going to be able to send your corporations here and take all of our natural resources, extract them, and then send them back to Europe where you guys make goo-goo gobs of money and you leave Africans with nothing. And I want you to take a listen to this clip by Vic Mensa. And in fact, YouTube, you guys are going to be able to see this clip by Vic Mensa. But he talks a little bit about this in a way that I think is he's kind of dope. Like, I like how he does this. But I want you all to take a listen to this clip because, and I don't know that this is what's happening with Nigeria. I don't think we've seen a similar proactive effort to nationalize resources and to take them back from countries like France, to take them back from countries like Britain. But something is happening here. Pay attention and take a listen to this clip. Amina, if you could just hit that. Thank you so much.
Now, I don't want to say I told you so, but remember my video in front of the Egyptian obelisk in Paris when I said France owes everything to Africa? Well, since Africa has started seizing back their resources, France is literally collapsing like today. 200,000 motherfuckers rioting in the street. They throwing crepes at the police, hitting them with baguettes. I seen 2 motherfuckers sword fighting with baguettes. Motherfuckers the police, they talking about. No, I'm gonna laugh at people struggling, but the economy is falling the fuck apart. They sacked the prime minister, cut health care, cut holidays. So you gotta understand, our Western comforts, hey, I got them too, I do, are the direct result of third world exploitation. Western luxuries are the result of imperialist exploitation, racist exploitation, straight like that. Act like we're an afterthought and should be grateful. But you turn off the pillaging of African, South American resources, castles crumble. 14 African countries kicked France out. They've been giving 80% of their GDP to France. Niger nationalized the uranium. Burkina Faso nationalized the gold. Mali nationalized the gold. Senegal ejected the troops. What's up, babe? I'ma clean it up, okay? The point here being the colonized peoples of the world are the literal lifeline of the West. They've made themselves entirely dependent on our exploitation, which leads you to ask, the fuck they gonna do when we take the power back? It ain't gonna be sweet.
Child, he put it where the goats can get it. But basically what's happening right now, France's economy is cratering. Have you guys seen these protests? It's incredible. We're not talking about that economy today. And that, again, I'm not saying that is at all what's happening in Nigeria. I'm just saying, and frankly, I just think that we should be aware of what's happening with Nigeria, because not only do we have this effort from the Americans attempting to revoke visas for Nigerians, but we also have this situation where a piece of legislation was introduced earlier this week that basically would have given Secretary of State Marco Rubio the capacity to revoke American passports, not just visas from immigrants, but to revoke or to refuse to issue American passports, which, as I said in the podcast, is a good reminder to me. I only got like 2-3 years left on my passport. I'm getting it renewed immediatamente. But watch this space, because we need to be clear about what's happening right now. And for those of you who are not in a space where you are making enemies with people who we may have to look to for refuge, thank you and keep it going. I know it's difficult work, but we got to do that work. Now, I'd mentioned at the very beginning that we were going to be today talking about this book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, which we are. I'm bringing it back up. This is by James H. Cone, phenomenal scholar, now an ancestor. But the reason this is a little challenging for me is because we are literally also going to be talking about a story of lynching. today. I don't know if you've heard, but at Delta State College, and now an additional news report, there have been at least 2 black men recently whose bodies were found hanging from trees. Now, this is sensitive, and so if you are watching on YouTube, I'm going to share a clip with you. This is a news clip, so you're not going to see anything sensitive here, but this, I don't know why these people are behind me. These people just walking in the hallway, but you are going to see this video clip. We're going to talk about it on the other side, but the fact that today we're talking about the cross and the lynching tree, and the lynching tree is such a prominent portion of white Christendom, I think it's important that we're aware of this. Let's take a listen.
We have some serious news right now. In the past 24 hours, 2 men have been found dead hanging from a tree in Mississippi. And the 2 cases do not have an explicit connection to one another, but the timing is very concerning. I want to talk about both cases separately. The first at Delta State University, where a 21-year-old Trey Reed, who is from Grenada, was discovered Monday morning. He was found, quote, hanging from a tree on campus. Authorities quickly said that they ruled out foul play, but an investigation remains ongoing.
How you rule
then
out foul
we
play
found
when
out that
investigation
another
ongoing?
man in Vicksburg, Mississippi, was found also hanging from a tree. That man's name is Corey Zukatis. He's a resident of Brandon, Mississippi. He was found, quote, hanging in a wooded area on the 4100 block of Washington Street near the Ameristar Casino, and an investigation remains ongoing there as well. There remain a lot of unknowns in both situations, and this is something that I'm going to continue researching and asking questions about because this is very serious. Spread the word and follow along for more.
The cross and the lynching tree. We will, of course, follow those 2 stories as we get more information. I will share them with you. But I'm going to read from this text. This is from chapter 1 of this book before we get into the conversation for today. And again, this is about the power of Black Christianity, or the limitations of Black Christian power in a white Christian nationalist world. All right, here we go. Nobody knows the trouble I see, the cross and the lynching tree in the Black experience. And it starts out with 2 quotes. The first is from the book of Acts, chapter 10, verse 39. And the second is a quote from The Crisis, which you should know about. The Crisis, a magazine that features very prominently in Black American history. And it was a source of hugely important information sharing for Black people. But Acts 10:39, the first quote says, "They put him to death by hanging him on a tree," referencing there the story of Jesus. Now, a clip out of this article, which is taken from The Crisis magazine. This is The Crisis 10, number 2, June of 1915, on the lynching of Thomas Brooks in Fayette County, Tennessee. Hundreds of Kodaks clicked all morning at the scene of the lynching. People in automobiles and carriages came from miles around to view that corpse dangling from the end of a rope. Picture cards. Photographers installed a portable printing plant at the bridge and reaped a harvest in selling the postcard showing a photograph of the lynched Negro. Women and children, white women and children, were there by the score. At a number of country schools, the day's routine was delayed until boy and girl pupils could get back from viewing the lynched man. These white Christians in the year of our Lord, 1915, had decided that this was a worthwhile venture to pause school so that the school children could take a field trip down to the bridge where they could see the body of that Negro hanging and swinging from a tree. The men, the women, the children, they were there. It was a festive affair, as you can see from the article. The book picks up there and it says the paradox of a crucified Savior lies at the heart of the Christian story. That paradox was particularly evident in the 1st century when crucifixion was recognized as the particular form of execution reserved by the Roman Empire for insurrectionists and rebels. Meaning Jesus wasn't put on a tree because he was somebody special. He was special, but he was put on a tree because he was an insurrectionist. He was a rebel. He was somebody who had to be put down because he was too Martin Luther King / Malcolm X / Ella Baker in his speech. He was too willing to get into trouble. You can't have somebody going around freeing people from their sicknesses and freeing them in their mind. Not when you live in an occupation, not when you live in an empire. Jesus was put on a cross, not because the cross was holy, but because the cross was like the electric chair. The cross was where you put people who were rabble rousers. Continuing. It was a public spectacle being hung on a cross, accompanied by torture and shame, one of the most humiliating and painful deaths ever devised by human beings, except lynching. except lynchings, right? You see how similar the conversation about how we describe what they did to the body of Jesus in the black church, in any church, and how similarly black people, when they are being lynched. Do you see the connections here? I hope you see the connections. Hope you see the connections. That Jesus died this way required special explanation. It made no rational or even spiritual sense to say that hope could come out of something so horrible. And yet that strangeness of finding hope in something that awful, it sort of typifies what's happening with Black Christendom. The book goes on to say that the sufferings of Black people during slavery are too deep for words. That suffering did not end with emancipation. The violence and oppression of white supremacy took different forms and employed different means to achieve the same end, the subjugation of Black people. And Christian theology for African Americans maintained the same great challenge to explain from the perspective of history and faith how life could be made meaningful in the face of death. At no time was the struggle to keep hope alive more difficult than during the lynching era. The lynching tree is the most potent symbol of the trouble nobody knows that Black people have seen but do not talk about, because the pain of remembering visions of Black bodies dangling from southern trees surrounded by jeering white, dare I say, Christian mobs, is almost too excruciating to recall. That's how we begin today's conversation. And I think it's important that we're clear about what's happening, because when we're talking about the cross and the lynching tree, but we got to start it with a modern day story. 2 modern day stories about lynchings. That is a problem. Now, when Christianity was African, and I need people to be clear, Christianity was an African iteration. The earliest churches, the earliest Orthodox churches, are part of the Ethiopian Coptic Christian reality. I'm not going to get into all the details. Pick up this book. It'll talk to you about it a little bit. I'm not going to get into all the details, but you should just know that the first iteration of Christianity, as it pertains to a church, the concept of the church, were Black people. These were African people. In fact, I'm going to show for you all who are looking on YouTube, Urban View, you're not going to be able to see this, but if you're listening on YouTube, you are looking on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. You see all these images? It's a whole bunch of Black ass Jesuses. I'm sorry. I know some of y'all, I just lost you by putting ass with Jesus. Let me get my spirit right, because I don't want to be an ego. We want to communicate. We ain't trying to be an ego. Do you see all these images of Black Jesus? Now, what's interesting is that they describe him in these articles as Ethiopian art, Orthodox Church of a Black Jesus. There was no such thing as Black or white during the time of the formation of Christianity. White people didn't create ideas like Black and white until many centuries later. They don't even start calling themselves white in the law until the 1600s. All of those images were of Jesus as he was commonly understood to look. Argue with your mom, argue with your pastor, or you can argue with the art. I don't care. I'm just telling you the information. And so when we look at the African understanding of what Christianity was, and I'm not trying to at all say that Christianity was an African religion. It became a global religion, but at the time that it was being formulated in the initial outset, it was a very African concept and construct. And as an institution, African Christianity was largely compatible with African life, meaning and purpose. There was no real need to choose between being Black and being a Christian, again, because Europeans didn't start creating phrases like Black and white so that they could justify enslaving us until many, many centuries later. Now, what's important about this is that we have to be learned about the shift that took place from what was happening in the continent of Africa, when people were understanding what that version of Christianity was, to what began happening as a result of how Europeans evolved during the Dark Ages. Now, keep in mind, we got that 2 cradle theory, which I've described before a little bit at length. 2 cradle theory, look up Sheikh Anta Diop. He talks a lot about how there were 2 cradles of civilization, one being African, one being European. And in the African cradle of civilization, you had abundance. You had land that could produce crops. You had people who had their needs met. They wasn't starving. They weren't cannibalizing each other because they had their needs met in abundance. But in Europe, where they were living in caves, where they were commingling with Neanderthals at the early outset of their history. And this is not shade. That's just I was just in museums in South Africa talking about this, all right? I'm not trying to shade, but the idea that you could be personally injured or offended by a retelling of your history, that says a lot about what might happen with how you use your history in today. But when you talk about what was happening in Europe, they were in the Dark Ages, and we had Mansa Musa disrupting the entire global economy of considering how much gold he was giving away. While they were in Dark Ages, they were living in systems that they ultimately cultivated that would give birth to the slave era. They had feudal land systems where you had a landlord, a man who owned the land. And then you had a whole bunch of poor people who lived on the land who didn't own anything, but they rented it as serfs. This system gave rise to indentured servitude, which also allowed the foundations for enslavement. But once Christianity became European, it also became a fundamental tool of African domination and white Christian nationalism. Now, I'm going to be reading from the Equal Justice Initiative. They have this phenomenal article that talks about European Christians and how they began embracing Christianity. And this article is called The Role of the Christian Church. And in the role of the Christian church, some of the things they talk about, in fact, you know what? Let me share my screen because y'all be thinking, we're going to show you some sources. We're going to show us how to read and interpret sources. All right, here we go. Starting in the 15th century, we see here, when European powers initiated contact and commercial activity with sub-Saharan Africa and continuing throughout the following centuries, organized religion played a leading role in developing, supporting, and legislating the transatlantic slave trade. Rooted, it says, in a belief that their duty to spread Christianity justified their actions, religious organizations did not only embrace human trafficking and the enslavement of millions of Africans, they actively participated. In 1452, we scrolling down, in 1452 and in 1455, Pope Nicholas V formally supported Spain and Portugal's mass kidnapping and enslavement of Africans because it would help to Christianize, not liberate, Christianize enslaved people. In 1548, Pope Paul III uses his apostolic authority, whatever the hell that is, to declare the slave trade legal in the eyes of the church, which empowered the religious monarchies in European nations to continue to engage in transatlantic trafficking. What this means is there were questions about whether or not this shit should continue, and the church was like, no, we good. We're good. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. And so if that is the case, and that's where we're at right now, sorry, I've got hair all in my face. I need to focus. If that's what's happening, and that's where we're at right now, we need to ask ourselves, what are some of the remnants of this sort of Christianity that we see today? As we start out talking about this topic, we're looking at these stories of 2 lynchings. The article goes on to talk about that the Pope and their friends were accepting gifts of enslaved Africans who were shipped to Rome from Africa. Through transatlantic trafficking, the church systematically extended its influence. European enslavers baptized millions of enslaved people whose labor they used to amass vast wealth. Why does that matter? Because the Christianity that white Americans practiced was not one about redemption and holiness. It was about empire. It was about empire. And on a day like today, when we are dealing with white Christian nationalism being at the heart of declaring war against people who are in disagreement with their perspectives, when we're looking at white Christian nationalism being at the heart of allowing an administration like this one to destroy black communities by canceling access to funds and resources that were set aside to specifically help them ameliorate the harms of the white nationalism that got them poisoned in the first fucking place. According to PBS, as late as 1800, most slaves in the United States had not been converted to Christianity because Europeans did not want them converting to Christianity because they felt guilty about the fact that you cannot enslave a fellow Christian. And so Christians, white Christians, began using different tools and resources. I want you all to take a listen to this clip. This is a clip from NBC Nightly News that talks about one of these sources, and that is a source known as the Slave Bible. Now, YouTube, I'm going to try to play this for you all so that you can see the video. Hold on one second. Let's make sure we get this. This is a slave Bible because white Christians did not believe once they started preaching Christianity to enslaved Africans, it wasn't to allow them to have their souls cleansed by the blood of Jesus and washed whiter than snow. It was to make more slaves. If you're a black Christian today and you're not grappling with this and you are embracing a Christianity of white nationalism, we don't serve the same Jesus. You're serving white nationalism. There is a difference. But let's look at this video and talk about some of the ways in which our communities were taught a version of Christianity that was fundamentally in opposition to what Africans had been practicing up until that time. Let's look at this video and take a listen.
Inside Washington's Museum of the Bible, a single volume that is like no other. The so-called Slave Bible. Remarkable not for what's in it, but for what's not.
So about 90% of the Old Testament's been removed and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. To put it another way, the normal King James Version has 1,189 chapters in it. The Slave Bible has only 232.
Missing are chapters and verses that might have encouraged uprisings. Book of Exodus, redacted. No story of Moses demanding Pharaoh, let my people go. Gone is Galatians, and the verse, there is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. And no Jeremiah, woe unto him that useth his neighbor's service without wages.
What they've left in are verses such as Ephesians 6:5, which is the famous verse, slaves be obedient to your master.
Looking at this Bible, it's hard to tell that anything's been taken out of it.
That's correct. I mean, it looks like a normal book. For many enslaved Africans, this would have been the first time they were exposed to the Bible.
A Bible selectively edited to instill obedience, using religion to underpin the horror of slavery. When people encounter this exhibit, what lasting impression do you want them to leave with?
But we want to pass the message on that may this never happen again. The Bible itself is a whole book. It's not one that you get to carve up and use this piece or that piece.
The slave Bible designed to repress rebellion, but it didn't work. Enslaved people in the Caribbean constantly fought against slavery until emancipation.
I think it's very relevant to understand our history, not just American history, but our African American history, our roots and how we got to this point.
A dark chapter in the history of the good book. Jeff Bennett, NBC News, Washington.
Now, as I describe in the podcast more in depth, there are a lot of people who will say, oh, my Lord, Lurie, you are being so harsh against these enslavers. They were Christians. They just did not know at the time that it was bad. Well, as I describe in the article, we get into an author by the name of David Walker, and he wrote this phenomenal piece for which he was murdered during enslavement. And he was basically saying these white Christians are enslavers and they're evil. Like this, we should be able to call this evil. This is not good. And for everybody who says they were just people of their time, we know that being people of their time was not an excuse, because people of that time was like, what you're doing is evil and this is wrong. David Walker says in his David Walker's appeal, for which he was killed, quote, never make an attempt to gain our freedom of natural right from under our cruel oppressors and murderers until you see your way clear. When that hour arrives and you move, be not afraid nor dismayed, for be ye assured that Jesus Christ, the King of heaven and of earth, who is the God of justice and of armies, will surely go before you. And those enemies who have for hundreds of years stolen our rights, kept us ignorant of him and his divine worship, he will remove. Millions of whom are this day so ignorant and avaricious that they cannot conceive how God can have an attitude of justice and mercy to us because it pleased him to make us black. Which color Mr. Jefferson, talking about Thomas Jefferson, who was probably busy raping a black girl at that moment, which Mr. Jefferson calls unfortunate, as though we are not thankful to our God for having made us as it pleased himself, as they, the whites, are for having been made white. They think because they hold us in their infernal chains of slavery that we wish to be white or of their color, but they are dreadfully deceived. We wish to be just as it pleased our Creator to make us. There was very clear debate about whether or not what the church was doing at that time was accurate, was good, was healthy, was in the line and in the teachings of God. And again, in the podcast episode, I go way more into this, and I'm sort of rushing right now because I want to get to the end of this. But I'm speaking really to a lot of the black Christians who have been coming out talking about how I just can't judge a Charlie Kirk. I can't judge the white nationalists because they are also children of God. You need to be crystal clear that for the entirety of the white American religious experiments in what we now know as Christianity, they have been very clear that the white matters more than Christian, and that when they hear the phrase black Christian, for them, the black matters more than the Christian as well, because they did only allowed Christianity to be promulgated to the enslaved occupations because it was going to allow them to further enslavement. But be crystal clear. If you cannot have a race, a liberation theology rooted, a James Cone approach to understanding what is happening in this moment right now, because I've seen a lot of them say, we don't worship the same Jesus. You're right. We don't worship the same Jesus. If you cannot call out white nationalism when it is raging, we don't worship the same Jesus. You don't worship Jesus at all. You worship whiteness. And I'm going to need the black church, because we go, and on the other side of this commercial break, we're going to hear some clips from some pastors who are really speaking out about this. But the lay people, the everyday community, the body of Christ, there are two types of Christians in American theology and in American reality. It's the white nationalist enslaver Christians, and it's the Nat Turner Christians. Choose ye this day whom you gonna serve. Choose ye this day whom you gonna follow. Choose ye this day which type of Christianity you gonna be calling. Are you calling on the God of liberation, or are you calling on the God of whiteness? They are not the same God. And the question we're going to have to figure out today, as we look at the cross and the lynching tree, as we are hearing stories about the lynching of black people today, as you got the entire nation gathered to mourn somebody who was willing to support the ideas that were direct descendants from the enslavement of our people. Oh, I guess I shouldn't say everybody, because Donald Trump went golfing when everybody else was at that memorial for that man. Choose ye this day, church. Who you going to serve? You going to serve the cross, or you going to serve the lynching tree? You don't get a whole lot more clearer than that. And if you are a part of a black church that has decided to serve the lynching tree, then I'm going to need you to come join the rest of us over here who are going to still continue to sit up underneath the cross. And if you can't do that, well, thank you for making the choice that much easier. We are now going to head into commercial break. Urban View.